So today we are going over section 5 of Find and Fulfill Purpose. Section 5 is protecting purpose. So last week we talked about fighting purpose and how we run, hide, argue with God, how we make excuses. We kind of do all those things that really pull us away from fulfilling purpose. And we do it for a lot of reasons. We do it because sometimes we're just nervous or afraid of what it looks like. Maybe what God is inviting us to do is a little too big or just doesn't seem realistic to us, and so we fight it. And so I want to talk today about protecting it. Yes, last week we talked about no longer fighting our purpose and trying really hard to not make excuses and trying really hard to not argue with God because he kind of knows what's best for us. And so once we make the decision to no longer fight our purpose, we have to protect it because so many things come up that cause us to potentially still lose track of being on purpose and doing what we were set out to do. So again, thanks for being here. If you don't have Find and Fulfill Purpose, or if you haven't read section 5, it's not a big deal. Like, still hang out. If you do want a copy and you don't have one, you could get it at Amazon.com, and you can also get a signed copy at JaquettaDansler.com. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into section 5. Because when we talk about protecting our purpose, we have to, one of the notes that I left off on last week was unapologetically walking in the direction that God has called you to walk in, and just unapologetically being who you were created to be. And sometimes that's easier said than done. And it even made me reflect, like, how often am I really walking in who God called me to be, and how often am I shrinking myself or censoring myself, or just not completely being comfortable with walking in that direction and being bold in who I know that I am. And I do that, unfortunately, sometimes. I do shrink myself or censor myself, or, I still run a little bit in the opposite direction of which I'm called. And so, we're in this thing together. Like, when I wrote Find and Fulfill Purpose, it gave me an opportunity to really dig in and understand purpose and where I sit with purpose. And I still reread it, and I'm still on the journey, and I'm still consistently learning about how to walk in that purpose and how to protect that purpose. So what I mean when I say protecting purpose, one of the things is distractions. And distractions is anything that take us away from the intended focus. So distractions could be a distraction from a task. It could be something really small. It's something that we deem important that we're focused on, and then something takes our focus away from that, and that's a distraction. Pretty simple, right? But what happens when we have too many distractions is we start feeling like we don't have time for things that are really important to us. And so distractions fill that space for those things that really matter. It changes our priorities. So one of the things I have done in the past is have time management courses, and I facilitate time management courses for professional development at large organizations and also at some community colleges. And so when I'm doing that, I often ask a question like, how many people have heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? And everyone raised their hand, right? Well, how many people, whether you agree or not, you've heard it, right? And then I say, okay, well, how many people ate breakfast this morning? And then without me asking, some people are like, well, I don't have time, or, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, not a big deal. So then I ask the same audience the question, how many people, just didn't have time to brush their teeth today? And I'm in a room full of professionals, right? So they're all kind of looking at me like, she crazy. Like, what did she just ask us? But, I'm just curious. Sometimes we're busy, right? And so things that are important to us might get pushed to the side. So I'm just curious. Like, have you ever had those moments where you just had to get out the house really quick and you just didn't have time to brush your teeth? And of course, the response is overwhelmingly like, no one's that busy. No one's too busy to brush their teeth. But the reason I bring that up is because whether it's 2 minutes or 4 minutes or 10 minutes, it's all a matter of perception. It's all about how we prioritize. And so those same 2 minutes that you didn't have to eat breakfast was take you 2 minutes to brush your teeth, take you 2 minutes to grab a breakfast bar, take you 2 minutes to make a smoothie. it's just a picture about priorities. I was having a conversation with my uncle Terry, and I was talking about how, I just don't have time to work out. And usually, if I'm having a conversation with someone about time, they're very empathetic, right? They're like, "Oh yeah, you run two businesses, you have a husband, you have 4 kids, yeah, I can understand you don't have time." But my uncle is not like that. He's like, "No, you got time. You just gotta figure it out. You gotta make time." And then he proceeded to tell me about these 4-minute workouts. And see, first of all, I love people in my life who like hold me accountable instead of just letting me be. Like, he wouldn't just let me be. He wouldn't just let me sit there and say, "Oh yeah, you don't have time." Like, he challenged me to be better. So nod to my Uncle Terry, who I love and miss, who's in heaven right now. But the things that he did and said still are here with us. And one of those things is you have time for what you make time for. And so he told me about these 4-minute workouts, and he sent me these 4-minute workout videos. And I'm like, really? What am I going to do in 4 minutes? Like, how is that going to be helpful? So the videos were intense, and they kicked my butt, and they actually were very challenging. But the point of it is, it took 4 minutes, right? It took 4 minutes to do something that I just did not have time to do, that I deemed important, but other things were more important. Another example is a emotionally healthy spirituality course that I took, and I took this course a couple times, and then I ended up teaching the course. It's incredible. If you have time to look for that book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, I recommend it highly. So part of it was this daily office where every day we would take 2 minutes just to meditate, 2 minutes to meditate on what we were studying, and just let God's word kind of sit in, so that we can reflect on what we read for the day before. And so those 2 minutes, and they even encourage you, set a timer, just 2 minutes. It was overwhelming, the number of people in class who were like, "Oh, I just didn't get to it," or "I did it in the beginning of the week, but not at the end of the week. Like, I just didn't have time." And it's interesting to think of the perception of time and think about 2 minutes, like just 2 minutes, how we could not have time to do something that's so important that's only 2 minutes. And we get 86,400 seconds in a day, right? But we don't measure our days by seconds. So a more realistic number to look at is 1,440. That's how many minutes we get in a day. And we think about what we do with those minutes, and what we do with that time, and how we can very easily be distracted from something that's important, from a 4 to 10 minute workout to spending 2 minutes with God, or anything that we deem important that doesn't really take long, but for some reason we just don't have time to do. And it could be meal prep, it could be studying, it just those things that we just can't find time to fit in. But then, have you ever like sat and mindlessly scrolled through the internet, or like, I will get on this loop and go down this rabbit hole and watch funny videos on YouTube for like 30 minutes or longer, right? And so it's like all these things that I don't have time to do, but then sometimes I like mindlessly waste all these minutes. And so those are distractions. Those are examples of how we are distracted from the bigger picture, or something bigger for us to do. And the distractions come, like 100,000 distractions come in increments of 2 minutes, right? And so there's so many things that we can get caught up in doing that pull us away from taking that next step to be the best version of ourselves. And so we have to protect ourselves against those distractions. And how do we do that? We just be intentional. We schedule, we plan, we practice, we pray. Like, we have to put those things in place in order to actually protect our time. As a self-employed person, when I first became self-employed, people will always say, "Hey, can you do XYZ, whatever XYZ is?" And when my response was, "Well, actually I have to work," or, I'll be working, I always got, "Well, don't you work for yourself? Don't you work from home? Like, what do you mean you gotta work?" And so there's this perception that because I work, and this was before, like, everybody works from home now, right? But this was before, we're talking 10 years ago. And so it was like, the perception was because I worked from home, my schedule was open. It was always available. So I had to protect that schedule. I had to have office hours. I had to set a schedule, and I had to keep to it because it was something that was important to me. And if you leave something that's important to you up to the discretion of someone else, then you're going to be in trouble. And so we think about our time and our schedule, and how distractions and how other people's agenda can penetrate that. And even something that's seemingly small or 2 minutes at a time is still pulling us away from being the best version of ourselves, and it pulls us away from setting the priorities to do what it is that we need to do in order to continue to walk in our purpose. And so sometimes it's not as easy to notice those distractions or to identify them, because when we're kids, we learn that there's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong. But as adults, we understand that it's good and okay, or it's better and best, or it's ugly and uglier. It's like everything is not good and bad. Some of the decisions we make aren't as cut and dry. It's like a huge gray area. And so discernment is the ability to judge. It's the ability to make decisions clearly. And so one of the things that I always encourage people to do when it comes to discernment is just simply pray for wisdom. Pray for discernment, because it's easy to get caught up in decision making and get caught up in bigger distractions. It's not so simple, and wonder if like this decision that I'm making is really what's best for me, or is this decision something to just take my focus off or take my mind off what's important and do something different. I've actually eliminated the method of writing pros and cons lists. I mean, for one, whatever you secretly want to do, you're going to have that bias of it, and it's going to have a longer pro list. But outside of that, it's just not cut and dry. It's just not that simple to think of it that way. And so the true discernment comes from God, and it comes from us leaning in. And it helps us with deciding what's a distraction and what's coming in our life to potentially keep us from doing something that is more important and being focused on the more important, bigger picture. Diversions are a little bit deeper. So distractions interrupt and they take our focus away, but diversions completely change our course. It changes our intended course. And so diversions are very strategic. It's actually a war tactic. And so a diversion, instead of just interrupting what you're doing, it turns you around. It changes the course in which you are on. Nehemiah is like one of my favorite examples for distractions and diversions, because as we know, Nehemiah is rebuilding the wall in Jerusalem. And nobody walked up to him and said, hey, you can't do that. You should stop. Instead, they came and were like, hey, let me talk to you for a minute. Or, hey, I have this letter I want you to read. Or, hey, I got something interesting I want to tell you. Like, they consistently tried to get him to stop working and come down, but they did it in a way where it was kind of a roundabout way. They didn't outright say, hey, stop what you're doing. And that's important, because sometimes it's easy for us to guard ourselves against distractions if they're right in our face, and we can easily say no to them and say, hey, you were trying to take me off course, or this is trying to take me off course. I need to refocus, and I need to not be distracted by this. But some distractions come friendly. Some distractions come and they don't seem like they are meant to take you off course. So you have to keep your eyes focused on whatever it is you set out to do. So Nehemiah wasn't concerned, like, is this a distraction? Is this a diversion? Like, he didn't even ask that question. He just said, I'm doing a great work. I can't come down. So whatever else is going on, or whatever else you need me to see, or whatever else is happening, like, that has to wait, because I'm doing a great work. And I know sometimes there's so many things pulling at our attention. There's so many people, especially, like, can I just talk to the moms for a minute? Like, seriously, we have little people who need our attention, and we have other people who we pour into. And so what happens is there's so many things that we pour ourselves into, and that it's hard to figure out which opportunities we should take and which ones we should leave and what we should do next. Just get decision fatigue. I get decision fatigue all the time. And so with that, Nehemiah's story helps me to focus in on that. I don't always have to make a decision about if I should do X, Y, and Z. If I'm just laser focused on the thing that God gave me to do, nothing else matters, or nothing else has to get done. Nothing else is urgent in that. And so Nehemiah said, no, I'm doing a great work. I can't come down. And he just wouldn't budge. And they tried to even be kind of strategic with it. Like, hey, just for a second, you can go back up and do that. But he would not budge. He would not come down. And so can I just tell you that God has called you to do a great work. and that sometimes you might feel like you have to do other things, and those things might be good, but just don't let the good get in the way of the great. Stay focused in on whatever you're doing, and don't let those distractions keep you from advancing and doing the good work that you were called to do. Because remember last week we also talked about how delayed obedience is disobedience. And so how when things are delayed, they can change the course that you're on. So I want to use the example of GPS because I am a Michigan girl, born and raised in Michigan, and I've lived in Texas for the last 3 years. And so in Michigan, if you're on a highway and you're using your GPS and you miss your exit, guess what you do? You get off and you get right back on. It's no big deal, right? So you miss your turn, you turn around, and you keep it moving. Well, it's not like that here. And so I had when I first moved here, I had so much anxiety because there's so many highways. In Michigan, there was I-75. That's it. But here, I missed my exit one time, and it was like I had to get on a different highway. I added 20 minutes to my drive, y'all. Now this is super anxiety ridden for me because first of all, as soon as I ever miss a turn or anything, I'm immediately looking at the recalculating to see how much time I just added to get to my destination. So when it started recalculating and it said that we would be there in like another 20 minutes or it added additional 20 minutes, that kind of freaked me out a little bit. And so I think about when we get distracted in life though, and where we have to redirect ourselves, and when those things get recalculated, how much time we could potentially add to getting to our final destination. Because what I want to be clear on is that we do all have a great work to do, and it's not magically gonna get done. And so I think a lot of us misinterpret Philippians 1:6 that says, "He who began a great work in you will see it to completion." And we think, not all of us, but some of us, I've heard it interpreted this way, that, if God gave you something, that you 100% will do it, it'll get done, don't even worry about it. Okay, but you have to move your hands and feet for it to get done, because the work will get done, but you might not be the one to complete it. Prime example, the Israelites, it was supposed to take them days to get to the promised land. It took them decades. And Moses never got to see it, right? Joshua did. So the work that God started in Moses was completed. So that scripture is true. The work was completed, but it was completed through Joshua. And so I want to encourage you to understand that, yes, God has completely given you vision and purpose and an assignment. And He has began a very good work for you. But if those distractions and diversions cause you to come down from that great work, then it will still be completed. It just may not be completed in you. And I'm saying that because I don't want us to feel like we have so much time to just get things done and keep sitting on the gifts and talents that God has given us. We keep sitting on the thing, we bury it. We talked about last week how the servant who had the one talent, he buried his. He didn't do anything with it. He just buried it. And so we keep burying it. Then we're going to die with the potential that God has given us. And can I just tell you, you don't want to die with your potential. You want to live a life of purpose so that you can do all those things that you were called to do, so that you're not burying them. Because also remember in that parable, when he buried his talents, that was considered evil, because God gave you that to share, not to bury. And so I want to make it very clear that yes, the work that he started, he will be faithful to complete it. But if he started it in you, be faithful to complete it, and to complete those assignments, and to eliminate distractions and diversions so that you can continue on the walk. And remember also that, and I remember also that we have to have courage to do those things, and that it's always easier said than done. And that's why we do this. That's why we write books on purpose and read them together, so that we can walk in this together, and so that we can do the hard work, right? Because I know that it's easier said than done. It's not an easy thing. It takes courage. And there's two definitions of courage. My aunt Garnetta has in her office, she has a sticky note that says courage or conformity. And I love that, because we often think of the opposite of courage as cowardice. But there's another antonym for courage, and it's conformity. Specifically in our time is just in our society is just easier to conform. It's just more, almost more respected to conform. It's you don't get pushback. You get, you know, you just, if you go against the grain, then people give you a hard time. You know, when you're willing to stand out, then it's a problem. You stay in the box that society created for you or that other people created for you, and it's easier. You keep a low profile, and you don't have to deal with opposition. But we weren't created to stay in boxes. And for way too long, like, I stayed in a box myself, and I censored myself, and I shrunk myself, and I consistently put myself in a position where I was burying my treasures, or I was not showing the courage to just stand out because I was conforming, because I was waiting on permission to do some of the things that I was called to do. But that's not the place where I live anymore, and I just want to encourage you also to not be in that place as well. Story that I absolutely love, and I know a lot of people who have, if you've ever read the Bible or ever heard a Bible story, you heard about David and Goliath. And the reason this is such a great story is because it's an underdog story, and we all love underdog stories. But even though I heard this story like a gazillion times, when I was reading it when I was writing Find Fulfilled Purpose, and I saw some things that I hadn't really paid attention to before. And so this story is a great story about courage and conformity and distractions and discernment. And so that's why I picked it up to share with you, because it's crazy how David displayed all of those things. And we do focus so much on like this little guy fighting the big guy and he won. But it's bigger than that. He just was not fighting Goliath. He was fighting against, no, let me just tell the story. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to paraphrase and make it kind of quick. So David is the youngest brother. So his brothers are in the army, and he's not. He's at home. He is the shepherd. He's watching the sheep. And so his dad asked him to take lunch to his brothers. So that's what he goes to do. Now, in my mind, he like couldn't wait to get in there with his brothers and really see what was going on. So he goes and he's kind of peeking around and sticking his nose in and seeing what's going on. And his big brother's like, hey, you know, get out of here. David saw Goliath. And David is described as being a teenager. Like some sources put him right at 15 years old. But however, he's a teenager. He's the youngest. He's a boy. He has no fighting experience. He goes and he sees Goliath tormenting his people, talking all kind of trash. And he is offended. And he looking around like, what's wrong with you? Y'all gonna let him talk? Why are he talking to y'all like that though? But why are he talking? You are the people of God and you just gonna let him talk? Like, what's, okay, I'm gonna fight him. And so they're like, his brother, and I don't have any older siblings, like I'm the oldest. So I can only imagine what he felt like when his older brother, the one he looks up to, was like, no, you're just a little boy. Go take care of your little sheep. Which is belittling because he had hundreds of sheep. He had a very big, important job. But his brother belittled him. Go home. Go home and take care of your little sheep. Leave this to the adults. But David just couldn't let it go. So the king said, okay, you want to fight Goliath? No problem. You can fight him. And gave him his armor. So David is a little guy, and he's never worn armor. So he took 2 steps in the armor and took it off. He was like, I'm not wearing this. This is not comfortable. I don't want to wear it. He took it off. He grabbed 5 rocks and a stick. Okay. Then he goes in front of Goliath, no armor. Goliath's armor is 125 pounds. I'm imagining that David weighed about 125 pounds, right? So David is the size of what's on Goliath's chest, right? That's how much bigger than him he is. And he has a stick and rocks, and Goliath is offended. And he said, am I a dog? You gonna fight me with a stick? So then David ran to Goliath and swung, hit him with a rock, and defeated him. And just for extra razzle dazzle, after he killed him, he took Goliath's sword and cut his head off with his own sword. And so now he has his head as a trophy. Okay, so this story has so many elements in it because first of all, his brother, his big brother, his older brother, whom he looks up to, told him to go home. Like, you can't do this. He tried to distract him because he's talking to David as David is trying to see what's going on. And then David got discernment from God because he is small, right? And Saul wanted him to wear his armor. I think I would have wore Saul's armor too. I think if I was in that situation, I would have been like, oh, okay, cool. Let me put on his protection because obviously you know best because you're the king. But David didn't seek discernment from the king. He sought it from God. And he was like, no, God has been with me fighting lions and bears to protect my sheep. He'll be with me now. And he took off the armor. Like, to me, that was deep. Okay, so then after he took off the armor, Goliath, who is towering over him, is upset. And he is reinforcing everything that everyone else has said. And he's pointing out the fact that he only had a stick in his hand. Like, you don't even have a sword. And so now we have two things of courage, right? So we have both sides of courage. We have the courage where David refused to conform, and then we have the side of courage where David absolutely ran in the direction of what he feared. I thought that was so powerful because this isn't like me romanticizing the story. In the Bible, it actually says that David ran towards Goliath. And so I love that story, obviously, like I said, for the underdog, the opportunity to cheer for the underdog. But it's so powerful because if at any point in his story he was distracted or he decided to conform, he would have lost that battle. If he had kept on that armor that Saul gave him, in 2 steps he would have tripped and fell on his face, right? If he had been distracted from actually seeing what was going on when his big brother was talking to him, then he could have left. There's so many opportunities where had he not followed through and had he not gotten discernment from God, that he wouldn't have been able to walk in that purpose and save his people. And so I love that story, and it makes me pose the question, like, to all of us, like, they didn't even know they were waiting on David. David didn't know that they were waiting on David. But because he had the courage to walk in his purpose, and because he had the audacity to be who he knew God made him, because he said so many times, like, God has been with me protecting my sheep, and I'm not big enough to fight a lion, and I did. So I know that God is with me now. And so because he had the audacity to be exactly who he was called in to be, and he leaned into that, he saved his people. And I'm curious, like, who is God calling you to stand in the gap for? Like, how many people are impacted right now by our distractions? Not immediately, like, not the people who we see and who we know are waiting on us. But what would it look like if we just unapologetically walked into the direction that God is calling us to walk in? Who will be impacted by our faith? Sometimes people are indirectly impacted by us because what we do and what we say show our faith in a way that it gives people hope. And so hope is very powerful. And it puts us in a position to provide hope in a way that people haven't probably seen before or normally wouldn't see. And so as we allow ourselves to be distracted or even worse, diversions come in our life, and we don't guard ourselves against them, then we are allowing ourselves to not fulfill that purpose. And I just don't want any of us to die with our potential. Like, I want us to die empty, completely use all of the potential and all of the purpose that God has put inside of you. I understand. I want to tell you something about legacy too. Because when we have something that God has given us, and we live it, there are some pieces of our story or some pieces of the bigger story that won't be fulfilled through us. And that's okay. They're not supposed to, right? But we leave a legacy, so they have an opportunity to be fulfilled through others. So sometimes we just start the story and it's supposed to be fulfilled through someone else. And that's okay. But if we don't even start the story or share the story, then it can never be fulfilled. It can never go on. One thing that really helped me to process death and understand it, specifically when my grandmother died, was legacy. And understanding that the things that she did and taught me, and the person who she was gets to live through me. And my kids who have never met her, who don't know her, they still get to experience her character through me. That's legacy, because she lived out who she was. She lived her faith. She was exactly who God created her to be, unapologetically. Like, right? Like, that's how grandmas are, though. You know, she was the best of the best. And everything she had, everything she knew, she poured into us so that we would know and understand. Because she was very generational, and she knew that she held some pieces from the generation before her and us, that she was the building block for that. She was the bridge for that. And so I want to say that about legacy, because I want to make it clear when I say that, you know, the work, for example, that Moses started was continued in Joshua. That's called legacy, and that's important, and that's something that should happen. But I also want to debunk the myth that everything that's given to you to start will automatically happen if you don't do anything about it. So even with legacy, we can't pass on the legacy if we keep all that information and all those nuggets to ourselves. So I want all of you and myself included to just be encouraged to identify distractions and diversions, and to protect ourselves against them, and protect ourselves in ways that we first knowing is half the battle, right? So knowing that they exist, and then managing ourselves accordingly so that we can show up and we can lean in and be exactly who we were called to be. So section 5 definitely drills down that a little bit more, and I'm super excited that you hung out with me to talk about section 5. If you have any questions or comments, make sure that you just send me a message. I love talking about purpose, and I will be on here again next week, same time, talking about section 6. Section 6 is fulfilling purpose. It is the last section of Find and Fulfill Purpose. So again, thanks for hanging out and talking about purpose with me. And I hope I was able to add some value and give you some aha moments and some things to think about. Again, if you don't have the book, Amazon.com, you can get a signed copy at JaquettaDancler.com. Thanks so much for all the love too with Find and Fulfill Purpose. I wrote it from my own experiences, from my heart, and the amount of feedback that I've gotten is really a testament to everything that I speak about. Me being able to walk in the direction that God has called me to, and how it's opened up doors, and how it has really been such a blessing to other people. It's kind of overwhelming, to be honest with you. The letters and the calls that I've received from people that I've never met before sometime, and just talking about how Find and Fulfill Purpose has actually touched them, or how it's changed them, or how it has come through in a very critical time in their life. So that's just me just sharing my gratitude, and also saying that it's an example of me actually walking in and practicing what I preach, right? So I say, you know, just do whatever it is, because I did not think that I should be writing a book. I didn't think that I was qualified to write a book. I didn't think that I was smart enough to write a book, or interesting enough, or whatever. But God walked me through the entire process, and I learned so much, and had the opportunity to just really dive in and trust Him in this process. And can I just tell you that from that moment to today, I've met hundreds of people who I've been able to share this with. Actually, we're in the thousands of people who own the book, so that's fun. You know, we've been on the Amazon bestseller list in the Christianity category, right next to Joyce Meyer. I have published 7 books this year. I'm finishing up 10. That sounds crazy. So by the end of 2020, going into 2021, I would have published 20 books in 2020. I'm saying that to say that if you had asked me about this before, like, hey, what you think? You think you're going to publish 20 books, or you think you're going to write a book? Or absolutely not. Like, that just wasn't the course that I had for myself. And so I'm being vulnerable, and I'm sharing this because when I say, like, walk in the direction that God is calling you to walk in, I'm not saying that to say pretty fancy words. I'm saying that because, you know, I live it. And the things that have come out of Find and Fulfill Purpose have been such a blessing to me, because it is a picture of what happens when you walk and do what God has called you to do, and when you actually use your gifts for a greater good. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you. And I just want to encourage all of you to continue to do just that, to be open, to pray for discernment, to be unapologetically exactly who you are, and don't censor or shrink yourself, because you are doing a great work and you can't come down. All right, that's it. I'll see you guys next week.